Imagine that you've dedicated your life to building an empire, pouring every ounce of your hard work into a legacy meant for your children. Now, imagine those very children, the ones you sacrifice everything for, turning their backs on you, abandoning you in a place meant for the forgotten. This was Edward Mensah's reality as he sat quietly in the back seat of his son's car, watching the imposing walls of Serenity Pines nursing home loom closer. His son, Nee, barely looked at him as he muttered, "Looks cozy enough," unloading Edward's suitcase onto the curb without even stepping inside. Edward forced a smile, though his heart was breaking. He had transferred his entire empire to his children a year ago, thinking he was securing their future and hoping he was retiring to being surrounded by his children and grandchildren in his final years. Instead, he was sent away, their only parting words being, "You'd be too much of a distraction to our plans." As he crossed the threshold of Serenity Pines, Edward couldn't shake the emptiness that settled in his chest. The other residents sat in eerie silence, eyes empty, expressions dulled by routine. But something about the place felt wrong. Too perfect, too controlled. Edward didn't know it yet, but this was no ordinary nursing home. He would soon stumble upon secrets, dark enough to make him question everything and everyone around him, including his own sanity. Edward Mensah was guided through the long, quiet corridors by a nurse with a forced smile and a too cheerful tone. "Here we are, Mr. Mensah. Your own private quarters," she announced, opening the door to a small, meticulously clean room. The room, though nice, felt too sterile and tidy, amplifying Edward's loneliness. One night, unable to sleep, Edward's attention was caught by a hushed voice in the corridor. "No mistakes this time," the voice hissed sharply. "We can't risk anyone noticing." He recognized the administrator, Dr. Boniface's cold, calculated tone, and as he watched her and a nurse slip down the hallway, his stomach turned. Their movements were brisk, almost rehearsed, as if concealing something dark and forbidden. Although Edward tried to return to his book and dismiss what he had seen, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he had witnessed something sinister. For now, he forced himself to push it aside, telling himself he had enough to worry about. But over the following weeks, strange things began to unfold. Familiar residents he'd occasionally chatted with started vanishing without a trace, their rooms cleared as if they'd never existed. Then, one particular night, Edward was startled awake by a bone-chilling scream echoing through the hall. His heart racing, he crept to his window, catching sight of two nurses carrying several large black bags that looked disturbingly like body bags, into a darkened ambulance. Standing nearby was Dr. Boniface, her whisper slicing through the night. "No paper trail. Strip everything from their rooms." The next morning, Edward walked past the room where the scream had come from. It was stripped bare, freshly cleaned, and silent as a tomb. A chill washed over him as he realized the gravity of what he'd witnessed. The eerie images played in his mind, sparking a fierce curiosity and a growing dread that pushed him to investigate. Determined to uncover the truth, he begins to quietly observe the staff, noticing how the nurses make frequent trips down to a hidden basement, often carrying large bags. Driven by curiosity and a sense of justice, Edward waits for a quiet night and sneaks down to investigate. In the dimly lit, dusty basement, he discovers a trove of abandoned belongings from past residents, ID cards, clothing, and even medical records, all hidden away as though these people had never existed. Shocked, he gathers a few items as evidence, determined to expose whatever sinister plot is unfolding. Just as Edward carefully shut the basement door to leave undetected, a voice pierced the silence, startling him. "You've been noticing the strange things too, haven't you?" Edward spun around to find Mr. Adiku, one of the longest residing residents, watching him with a knowing look. In that moment, Edward realized he wasn't alone in his suspicions. Mr. Adiku might hold valuable insights, or even hidden truths about the dark secrets of Serenity Pines. Mr. Adiku leaned against the wall, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "You've seen it, haven't you? The strange movements in the dead of night, the sudden disappearances?" Edward nodded, feeling his pulse race. "It's worse than you think," Mr. Adiku continued, his tone grave. "People here without families, they don't just pass on, they vanish without a trace." Edward felt a cold chill run down his spine. "But why?" he whispered. Mr. Adiku's face grew darker. "Money," he replied softly. Dr. Boniface targets wealthy residents with no family ties, forcing them to transfer their fortunes to her before she arranges their quiet removal. As for the healthy ones, she has their organs harvested and sold on the black market. He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The lengths Dr. Boniface goes to are far more twisted than you could ever imagine." Edward shuddered, realizing he'd stepped into something dangerously dark, but there was no turning back now. In his room, Edward carefully stashed the incriminating evidence he had gathered behind a small hidden compartment he had discovered in the closet. He knew these items could one day prove invaluable, so he made sure they were well concealed. The next morning, he met with Mr. Adiku, speaking in whispers as they strategized their next steps. "I'm relieved to have someone here who believes me," Mr. Adiku said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "Every time I confided in the other residents, they dismissed my suspicions, calling it my wild imagination. You see, I was once a famous horror mystery writer. They just chalk it up to that." Edward nodded, realizing just how deeply isolated Mr. Adiku had been in his fight for the truth. They agreed on a bold plan. They would follow and record Dr. Boniface and the staff as they transported the bodies at night. Armed with a newfound sense of purpose and camaraderie, the two men prepared to expose the chilling secrets lurking within the walls of Serenity Pines. On the night of their planned operation, Edward and Mr. Adiku hid in the shadows, recording as Dr. Boniface instructed the staff to move the bodies. "As always, no loose ends," she whispered, her tone steely. The thrill of capturing concrete evidence filled Edward with a sense of triumph as they made their way back to his room, ready to unveil the truth in the morning. But when Edward opened his door, his blood ran cold. Dr. Boniface was already inside, waiting, her expression smug and menacing. "Well played, Inspector Gadget," she sneered, clapping slowly. Panic overtook Edward, and he span toward Mr. Adiku, who stood still in the doorway. In desperation, Edward tossed him the evidence and shouted, "Quick, get away from here!" But to his horror, Mr. Adiku simply smiled, clutching the evidence tightly as he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Turning to Dr. Boniface, he leaned in and kissed her passionately, their sinister partnership now unmistakable. Edward's mind reeled as he realized the dreadful truth. He had been betrayed by the one person he trusted most. In a chillingly casual tone, Dr. Boniface sneered. "You see, we noticed you'd been sneaking around, Mr. Mensah. So, my father and I decided it was time to keep a closer eye on you. Nothing happens at Serenity without my knowing." She shot a pleased glance at Mr. Adiku. "My father here devised the brilliant idea of becoming your ally, so he could feed me every detail of your little plans. Clever, isn't it?" She laughed, a cold, mocking sound that made Edward's skin crawl. Edward stared, his stomach twisting in revulsion. Did she just say father? His mind spun as he remembered the passionate kiss he'd just witnessed. As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Boniface smiled, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Oh, that?" she said smoothly. "I've always been my father's special girl." I took my mother's maiden name so no one would ever guess our true connection. That way, we could enjoy each other freely. Her expression was one of pure satisfaction, a twisted pride in their dark secret. Edward's heart raced, his horror deepening with each word. What kind of sick, twisted nightmare had he stumbled into? In a chillingly calm voice, Dr. Boniface leaned over Edward, syringe in hand, and whispered, "I'm going to send you to a happy place. Don't worry, I take care of my own." Edward's heart raced. His struggles, futile as two nurses he hadn't noticed before, restrained him with unyielding grip. Helpless, he watched the needle pierce his skin, the unknown substance spreading warmth through his veins as his vision blurred. His strength faded, and the world went dark. When he finally stirred, his mind swam with confusion, and he found himself confined in a small padded room. His arms were bound tightly in a straitjacket, the white foam walls closing in around him, cold and silent. Edward's screams echoed off the padded walls, his desperation filling the small, sterile room. Moments later, two nurses rushed in, wearing expressions of sympathy. "Oh, poor thing," one murmured, shaking her head sadly. "I hear his family left him, and it drove him into this catatonic state of psychosis." Edward's voice cracked as he tried to explain what he'd truly uncovered, pleading for them to listen. But the nurses only exchanged pitying glances, as though humoring a confused man lost in his own delusions. The weight of his nightmare sank in as Edward realized his words would forever be dismissed as incoherent ramblings. Dr. Boniface had trapped him in a living nightmare, and no one would believe what he knew. Outside his padded prison, Serenity Pines resumed its quiet routine, its dark secrets cloaked in silence once more. The lesson learned from this story is that deception often hides in plain sight, and not everyone is who they seem. Trust must be earned, not given blindly. Hi fam, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you don't miss any of your favorite African folktales. Until next time, it's bye from us at Apenthene African Stories.